This is the Digital Transition Podcast, produced by the Institute of Communication of NOVA University of Lisbon. The Digital Transition Podcast is an initiative of the Doctoral Seminar on Contemporary Culture and Technology with the collaboration of its students.
Today, we interview Benjamin Weil, Director of the Modern Arts Center at the Fundação Gulbenkian since 2021. Born in Paris, where he completed his studies in art history, Benjamin Weil has a significant and internationally recognized career as an art critic and curator. Among the various positions he has held in this field, we highlight his role as director of the New Media Arts Department at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London, his curatorship of media arts at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and his artistic direction of the Centro in Santander, among others. Our conversation was centered on the topics of artistic institutions and practices in the digital era.
Hello everyone, welcome to Digital Transition. Our guest today is Benjamin Weil, a French art critic and curator, and at present the director of CAM, the art center of Gulbenkian Foundation in Lisbon, that holds a collection of modern and contemporary art, the one that has the largest representation of Portuguese artists gathered so far, I believe. To help me with this conversation today, there are also here two other people joining us. Luisa Ribas, a designer, a curator, and the head of the Communication Design Department of the Fine Arts School in Lisbon. Hi, Luisa. Thank you for joining us. It's really great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Teresa. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for the invite.
And we're also joined by Natalia Rek, a doctoral student in Contemporary Culture and Technology, a program at NOVA University of Lisbon that collaborates regularly with our podcast and actually produces our podcast. Thank you for joining us, Natalia.
Hello, thank you, everyone.
I'm your host, Teresa Cruz. I'm a researcher at ICNOVA, the Institute of Communication of NOVA University of Lisbon. So let's dive in our conversation. As I was saying just a while ago, you came to Lisbon at this very particular moment in time where CAM, the Modern Art Center, was being remodeled. So you put together a whole program that did not take place at the actual physical space. And so I would like to ask you in which way the fact that you could not occupy this space triggered a more exploratory program, perhaps a little bit more experimental or involving different art forms, different contexts, the relation between artists and local communities. Was this a one-time, more experimental and edgy program, or is it something aligned with the vision that you have for CAM, and how will it come together with the fact that you will also have to work with the collection?
So I always like to say that when Centro de Arte Moderna was imagined by the board of Fundação Gulbenkian in the late 1970s, it was meant to host a collection that had been growing since the late 1950s, which purpose was to support artists on the one hand, to promote contemporary art in this country, and then to promote Portuguese art outside of this country. So that fund, that collection grew, but it wasn't really thought as a collection. And then all of a sudden, the idea was to bring this set of works, first to have a place where to store them when they were not being shown, and secondly, to have a place where to show them. So the history of the park is a very interesting one. As you know, it was part of a very large estate that belonged to the White Palace that's in front of it, which name I always forget, I apologize. And then it was part of the Gulbenkian campus, but before that, it was a dog race place, it was an amusement park, it was so many things, yes. Yeah? It was so many things, but all kinds of things that were very important to the life of people in Lisbon. So when the foundation took over in the 1960s and opened the campus in 1969, the garden continued to be a public place. So there's all these bits and pieces of history that come together. So when the museum was closed, I was like, okay, I'm going to go and meet the people I would like to bring to come in the future. So first thing that we did was this surrounding of the building with these gates, and then this graphic novel that was counting the history of the place to remind people. So it starts with a very funny thing. It starts with the mallard ducks. The mallard ducks, which everybody knows, are very much part of the life of the garden of Gulbenkian. People think that the mallard duck were brought by Gulbenkian. No, they pre-exist Gulbenkian. They've been there maybe for centuries. Nobody knows. But it's really important.
That was very noticeable for us and very interesting because we are in the neighborhood, so we could appreciate all that. And actually, we participated in the interpretive art center dedicated to Gonçalo Ribeiro Teles, one of the authors of the Gulbenkian Gardens, as a team, as a communication design team.
So core thing too. So that was the first thing, and then the second thing was really interesting. My colleagues in marketing wanted to do an advertising campaign, and I said, why should we do an advertising campaign for a museum that's not open? Doesn't make sense. So can I turn this proposal and use the money to do something else? And they said, sure. So we called CP. And we said to them, we don't want to do an advertising campaign. We want to do an artist project. And what we did is that we invited two artists, Fernanda Fragateiro and Didier Faustino, to intervene on the trains as if it was advertising, so using the same elements of advertising, so like a film that's put on top of the trains, on the train cars, right? But the message being different. So using the technology of advertising, but doing something different. So what did we do? We chose two lines. One was a Cascais line that leaves from Cais de Sodré and goes to Cascais. Fernanda Fragateiro chose that one, and she unfolded a project that she had already started working on with like silk threads, color silk threads, which she has applied to the train, so that the train becomes like a moving work of art. And Didier Faustino chose the Sintra line. And why did he choose the Sintra line? Because he was really, really interested in the fact that this train crosses through a significant number of different types of neighborhood, which basically, if you look at all of them, are a concentrate of all the different communities that live in the Lisbon area. So for him, it was really interesting to start thinking about what would be a common language. And his common language, in his mind, was tattoo. So what did he do? He studied like all the tattoos that people usually have on their bodies, and he decided to tattoo the train with all these tattoos. The idea being that every person who would board the train would sort of like think, it's the same, yeah? Or it's the same, whatever it is. Maybe it's the same, I don't know. Anyway, so that was this idea. And this was, to me, really important to sort of like say, okay, let's take the art outside of the exhibition space and let's see what happens. So there were trials, yeah? The third part of this was the containers. So we did 3 containers. Actually, we did 4 projects. One was installed in Benfica, and it was used first by Rui Toscano and then by Gabriela Bergaria. 2 very different types of projects, learning from experience. Rui Toscano's project, beautiful project, very difficult to activate. Very difficult, because it was something that you need to contemplate. You need to go inside the container, and you need to really engage with it as a work of art in a museum. Wrong, totally wrong, doesn't work. People don't relate to this. So Gabriela, what she did is that she really activated the space, and she used the container as a point of departure to engage with the audiences, and that worked. That worked really beautifully. Then we did a project with Carlos Bunga, which was posted downtown next to Praça do Comércio, and that also was really interesting. Nobody noticed it. I mean, after 3 weeks, we went down to do inquiries, and said, did you notice that there was a container with a work of art inside? No. People didn't even notice there was a container. It was incredible. A huge shipping container on a public square. People didn't notice it. So we decided to take it out and put it in the garden, which was an interesting way to sort of solve a very complicated problem. But that was a really interesting learning experience.
Then you did another one that everybody noticed up in the skies.
Yeah, but that came after. And that was, to me, was really interesting because we tried these things to try and see how we can engage audiences. And we understood what works and what doesn't. Like, for instance, another container we did was in Belas. And in this case, we worked with an artist, and I apologize, I can't remember his name. We have to look for him afterwards, who started working with a group of youth, young people of the community, to develop a project that would suit a purpose for them. So once again, we learned that in order to be able to reach out to people in the public sphere, we need to engage, and we need to create a participatory pattern. And that became even more clear when we did the project with the Biblioteca Pública in Alcántara, whereas we worked with 15 people who were volunteers, and with them we developed a whole project of an exhibition with works from the collection of CAM that they chose according to various different criteria that we needed to work on together, because they could choose things, but they could not choose anything. So they have to understand that some works are too fragile to be shown in a space where you cannot control the humidity level. Some works are too expensive to be shown in a place where there's no security. Some works are too big to be transported, etc., etc. But they made a selection, which I thought was quite beautiful, actually. They worked on everything. They worked on the labels, they worked on the guided tours, they worked on the wall text, they did the whole thing themselves. So we introduced them to what it is that makes an exhibition. And it was really, really interesting, because at the end we learned that we can engage audiences like this. We can also curate shows, but it's also interesting to see how far you can go into making people believe that the show belongs to them and then engage with it. So, for instance, there's a lot of ideas that we still haven't unfolded, but that will stem out from all these experiences that we carried out. For me, I was really, really happy that the building was not ready when I arrived. Yeah. Because, during these years, we had so many opportunities to talk to people, to test things, to see what works, to see what doesn't work. And to a certain extent, if you think about the shows that we opened last Friday, the fact, for instance, we brought the work of Tristan Imundu in the CAM was really the result of this whole thinking process that we had started working on, 3 years ago. So it was really important. One thing that you said about CAM, not only was it closed, but 5 years before I arrived, CAM sort of disappeared, became Museu Carlos Gulbenkian Coleção Moderna. So we went back to, we have an identity. That identity is Centro de Arte Moderna. So we're not the museum. We're another entity. We're Gulbenkian. Of course we're Gulbenkian. Very much so. But we're not Museu de Arte, Arte Gulbenkian. We are Centro de Arte Moderna Gulbenkian. And that's really important. That separation and that distinction. It doesn't mean that we cannot engage with the museum. It doesn't mean we cannot collaborate. If you saw the Fernando Lemos show, you know that a lot of Japanese prints from the museum were on loan to us. So this is not, we are part of the campus, and we believe very much that we can engage with the other units of the Gulbenkian Foundation to work things out. But it was this really departure point where you could test a lot of things that will inform the way we work. And that will inform, again, to restate what I said before, we are centered on the artist, but we're very publicly minded, and we need to bring those two people. We are an interface.
I wonder why you didn't thought that this could be a good moment for CAM to go digital, to create a sort of alternative ecosystem. that could have been also the opportunity for that. That was not the choice. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that, since you were interested on the internet since its very beginning, since the 1990s, that actually pioneered one of the first art studios for digital art. So why didn't go digital and sort of worked on the old idea of the virtual museum? It seems less and less attractive for art institutions. I wonder why that is. Could you give us your thoughts on that?
It could be a very long-winded answer, and it could be a conversation that could last a few hours. So, in 1995, as you know, I co-founded the first digital foundry and website related to it called AdaWeb. Why did I do that? I did that because, not so that I was so interested in technology, but I did that because I thought that internet was a public space that was not yet structured and defined, and that there was space for art to occupy it. Not necessarily the only form of communication, but with a specific space that was not yet totally dominated by corporate interests. Yeah. At the time, who was online? Primarily universities. So it was a space of knowledge. It was not a space of commerce. It became a space of commerce. It became overwhelmingly a space of commerce. I'm not even going to get into the social networks thing because that's another story. But I was hoping at the time that if we were stepping in early enough, we would have an opportunity to establish an interface and a voice that was strong enough that when the commercial entities started coming in, we would still have a space where to exist. So the reference point was very much the way video art in the early 1970s, when artists discovered the portable video system, started distributing their work in a very sort of like informal fashion, not necessarily just in the walls of the institution. And that was my goal. Then my other goal was like, we can help define the language of digital communication if we set up an office wherein artists can come in a little bit, and that's why I called it a digital foundry, because artists who print go to print shops, artists who sculpt go to foundries. So the idea was like, if we have people who know how to program code, how to build web pages, how to write scripts for animations, and so on and so forth, we would be able to help artists, create site-specific works, which we did quite successfully so for a while. The only thing that was a problem is that the economic model was not viable. So it was costing a lot of money and it was not generating any kind of income, which basically means that the people who put money into this at the beginning because they believed in it stopped financing it, and it died for that reason. Now, I continued being engaged with that when I was at SF.NOVA, being the curator of media arts, and commissioned works to be online. But the whole idea of the online museum, which started being very strong at the time, I don't know if you remember, the Guggenheim wanting to have a virtual Guggenheim. Everybody was involved with this at one point. And everybody sort of came to terms with many, many different things. The first one, I would say, is money. It's extremely expensive to do things right online. Extremely complicated. You need to keep up all the time. You need to make sure that, the projects that you do are compatible with like a never evolving ecosystem. The browser codes change, HTML2, HTML3, HTML4, and so on and so forth. Flash appears, disappears, JavaScript appears, disappears, whatever. I mean, it keeps moving, yeah? And the technology is complex enough that unless you have like a mastery of this, to provide artists, because artists don't have time to learn all these languages, you never keep up. So your website becomes obsolete. If you look at AdaWeb today, it's a joke. It's really funny. I don't know if you ever looked at it, but you go to adaweb.com, it still exists. Huh?
Yes,
It's housed by the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. It's a joke. I mean, first of all the movements that were supposed to be long became so fast you cannot see anything. The images were the resolution of what we were doing at the time. So now they're about the size of a stamp. If that, maybe even less, 3 pixels basically. So you realize that, this has become archaeology. It's no longer the projects they used to be. And some of them were really extremely interesting projects at the time, because they were addressing this very complicated moment where a new media comes into play and is immediately, taken away by commercial entities. And basically, what is the web today? It's a shopping center. It's a shopping center. So when you go to the web to read newspapers eventually, although you probably look at them on your phone with the app now, to buy a plane ticket, or to buy something that you can have delivered. But do you really go to a website to learn about something? Do you really go to a website to experience something that's not with an immediate level of satisfaction? I don't think so. People are tired.
Still a big World Wide Web indeed, which is why artificial intelligence or machine learning actually works. But perhaps Luisa would like to jump in the conversation. She's a curator. She has also worked a lot with digital arts. I think she can relate very well to what we were saying.
Given your the past experience that you've been mentioning, that is very interesting also in the way that you explored new channels, to captivate diverse publics. And given the constraints that you just mentioned in presenting new media arts, in particular using the online context as a means to do so, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on the current state of the field of media arts? And also its current relationship to contemporary arts, considering that we can observe that in a certain way contemporary arts have been adopting and absorbing many of the technologies and also aesthetics that were previously considered to be in the realm of media arts, for example.
So it's really interesting. I remember way back when something that we called at the time machinima, whereby people would write scripts and enact them in gaming platforms and create narratives that would sort of basically fuck the whole idea of the shooter game or of the but within the constraints of the gaming platform. So there was no need to find sets. There was no need to. Everything was like contained within a language structure that was never defined in the first place to make art. Right. I find this super interesting. I mean, the same way, it's interesting to me to sort of like intervene on spaces that were usually devoted to advertising. It's the same way. It functions like it's like a way of deriving or perverting something that becomes really interesting. And to me, in a way, if I think about what's interesting to me in media arts in general, is particularly that. I mean, it's the reappropriation of languages that are not necessarily languages that were structured in the first place as art languages. No, as you think about the fact that canvas, paint, paper, graphite, pastels, etc., primarily were designed by and for artists. No. But the moment you start deriving, appropriating an instrument that was not necessarily meant to make art in the first place, your challenge is to defy the limits of what this system was meant to make happen. So it's, for me, the artist intervention on television, if you think about the great achievements of Nam June Paik, for instance, just to name somebody so obvious, was precisely that. Magnet TV is brilliant. It's so simple and it's so effective. And at the same time, it's like, so if there are ways to sort of like penetrate, a realm that is not, meant to be a place for art. Like, for instance, it's really interesting. I'm still waiting, and I don't spend enough time looking for these kind of things because I'm a bit pressed with time as a director. But, I really would love to hear someone tell me, I found this amazing project on TikTok. And not another, like, video, but rather somebody who really fucks with the whole system and who's going to sort of, like, create a situation where TikTok becomes havoc, which it already is. But you know what I'm saying? So to me, there is this idea that media arts, the most interesting forms of media arts, is the one that managed to sort of take over and pervert something.
And do you think, since you mentioned that, do you think that in the same way that in the 20th century artists wanted to conquer mass media for the arts, can we have the illusion of conquering social media for the arts in a way?
Well, that's what took me away from technology and art, because I saw when I saw what happened to the web, I was like, okay, maybe we should focus on something we can. I don't know if the word control is the right one, but wherein, the codes can be acquired and digested and interpreted by people in a constructive fashion. Disruption doesn't always work. As I said, my idea to do this intervention on the trains comes from this extraordinary billboard advertising campaign that Felix González Torres did when he was invited in the early 1990s to do a show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And he said, I don't want to do a show in the museum. I want you to say, I want the money that you would use to make my show, and I want to buy advertising space to put one image. And that one image, I don't know if you ever saw it, maybe you did. It's this empty bed, black and white. So it breaks all the codes of advertising, no? It's black and white. There's no text. It doesn't come straight in your face. It's the exact opposite. It's silent. Beautiful idea. I really, really seriously doubt, with all due respect, because I loved that piece, if people then, and probably even less now, noticed it. Because I tell you something, we did a survey after putting these two projects on the trains. We did a survey because we wanted to know what was the impact. What did people see? What did people not see? Did they think it was interesting? Did they, etc., etc.? A really high number of people didn't even notice. Mm-hmm. You would think to yourself, you board a train that's covered with tattoos, and you would be like, wow, what is the advertising for? Yeah, there's no brand anywhere. What is this all about? And all of a sudden you would have the curiosity to try and find out, what is this? And it was written in the train. Yeah, it was like Came Movimento, Didier Faustino, whatever. 80% of the people who boarded the train were so focused on their screens or on not missing the train or whatever it is they were in their life, they didn't see. I would be an advertiser. I would say never again. Because you know what? If I try to sell them something, they don't even look at the train. They look at the door. This is what they look at. Because they go straight into the door, then they sit, then they go through the train, then they go out. They don't look at the train. It doesn't exist. So how do you manage to acquire the codes of something that already doesn't necessarily function properly, to be able to deliver a message that is not a message that's formatted the way people are expecting the message to be formatted? This is a real challenge. And to me, I really wonder, if we have the strength to do that. Once again, if one day somebody says to me, look, this is an incredible project, somebody did. I say TikTok because It's quintessentially, a channel of distraction. As you probably know, for 1 year we worked with a youth advisory group, and its youth advisory group was telling us, how we should adapt the institution to be more friendly to upcoming generations of people, and not just always cater to people who are over 50. And one day I sort of said to them, so do you think we should have a TikTok channel? And they said, no, absolutely not. And I said, why? They said, because TikTok is just noise. So we love to go on TikTok to waste time, but we'll never pay attention seriously to any content on TikTok. We just go like this. It's like it's meaningless. So I said, so Instagram? And they said, sure, Instagram, fine. But Instagram, within a certain level. So how do you create, if you think about somebody like Cindy Sherman posting on Instagram every day, it's nice, but it's not really Cindy Sherman. It's neither advertising nor no real art. You know what I'm saying? So I think that this challenge is a really difficult one to face. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I have yet to be shown something that convinces me that someone has managed to break that glass ceiling, if you will want to call it that way.
Social media are structured is very hard to break in a way. But connecting to that idea, in a lateral way, let's say, we can observe nowadays that some cultural and also academic institutions are cultivating affinities between design and media arts, given that both fields not only share an exploratory and experimental stance towards any new medium or emerging technology, but also they critically reflect on the cultural and social impacts of those media or technologies. So I was wondering, how do you perceive the relationship between media arts and design? In particular, how do you perceive the discursive role of design within a contemporary cultural center, for example?
That's an interesting question. I wonder, if I think of design as communication, which I guess we all agree is one way to look at it that makes sense, I would say that what I would love to create is going back to this idea of interface, is ways to communicate information to people that would enable them, for instance, to... I'm going to give you a very specific example because it's been bugging me for a while. Maybe you can have a great solution, by the way. When we did this project in Alcantara Library, I noticed that the wall labels that those people wrote were completely different from the ones that the institution would write. And all of a sudden I realized that it would be really interesting if people sort of came to realize that to experience contemporary art, you don't need to know everything. Like, it's not like you have to read 10, 25 books before you get into a show. And that there's 1 million different ways of interpreting something. So my idea originally was we have these wall labels, people read them to sort of understand what they're looking at because they think that they need to understand something, that they need to understand what is the message. And it's no, you don't need to understand what is the message. You just need to experience it and make up your own mind about how this has affected you, right? You need to appropriate this. This is a dialogue you need to have with the work of art as a visitor. Call yourself a consumer, a user, whatever you want to call yourself. But, that this relationship is a one-on-one relationship. So the wall label is here to facilitate that. The wall label is not here to say, this is the truth. And there's only one. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if there was an interface that would enable, someone who walks into a museum to read one label, but then to unfold other labels. And maybe that label is written by the person who was just before me, or maybe the label was written by a football player, or maybe the label was written by a very famous art critic, or maybe the label is written by a 6-year-old child. And all of these interpretations of the same piece become available to one person to sort of decide how she or he is going to make up their own understanding of what they're looking at, and perhaps even leave another label. So it would maybe grow, you know? And this is the kind of things that I would be interested in, how the transformational experience of art can be conveyed by way of intelligent design. And this is one example. I mean, I'm sure if we sat here for more time, we'd come up with like, oh, but what didn't you think about this? How do you... I don't know. It's really interesting, you know. I mean, does it make sense to sort of like paint the walls a different color? Does it make sense? I don't know if you noticed in the exhibition that we have downstairs of the collection, the architect who designed the exhibition, Diogo Passarinho, he decided to take all the iconic works, so the most important historical works like Armada Negreiro or Amadeo Sousa Cardoso or people like this, and then he put them off the wall. So the paintings are not hanging on the wall, they're hanging on a platform that's separated from the wall to sort of create a volume and to sort of say to people, these are the reference points, if you will. Yeah. Interestingly enough, you know, I don't know that many people notice that. And I'm saying to myself, it's a brilliant idea, but did it come across to the visitor? I'm not sure. So I would love to sort of explore, you know, ways to create that interface with designers, and make sure that, you know, this idea comes across. Really, like, you know, maybe it's multiple labels, maybe it's different type of lighting, maybe, I don't know, I have no idea. How do you create, you know, a narrative? Because at the end of the day, an exhibition is a narrative, right? How do you create a narrative by way of designing a space, staging, whatever you want to call it, whether it's designing, staging, you know, scenographing, but that would be for me super interesting, you know, and see how far we can take things without trivializing the content, because, you know, of course, it's really important to, you know, leave space for the art to exist.
Interesting, because while you were talking, I was thinking about, of course, one of the first instances, let's say, in which we think about the role of design may be connected to, let's say, information design in a way. And I was reminding some projects in that area. For example, a project by Vladan Jolan and Kate Crawford, Anatomy of an AI System, that use the language of information design, let's say, to talk about a very timely topic. And that also brings me to another question and a relatively different subject, that is, what is your perspective on contemporary artistic stances towards emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, particularly considering their current common applications, but also implications in areas of knowledge and creativity? How do you see or perceive artistic topic discourses connecting to that field?
Again, and pardon my French, I like the idea of artists sort of appropriating these tools and fucking up with them, you know, and creating and showcasing the limits of artificial intelligence, which for me, just for me, the whole idea of putting together artificial and intelligence together is completely pointless. It's like virtual reality. It's like these things that don't make sense. I mean, intelligence cannot be artificial. it's real. It's something that's like a complex product of something. So machine learning, complex algorithmic solutions, call it whatever you want. I mean, I'm not saying it's not interesting. That's not what I'm saying at all. But for me, the idea of trying to humanize or biologicize, I don't know what the word would be, because it's not just intelligence, it's not just human, obviously. I mean, a lot of non-human forms of intelligence, living forms of intelligence exist. But to me, there's this thing that really that disturbs me profoundly when you start talking about something that's intelligent when it's just purely mechanical. Even though it's very sophisticated, that's not the point. I mean, I'm very happy to have DeepL, yeah? And I'm very happy that DeepL is learning Portuguese very fast, so that when I need to type something in Portuguese and I don't have time, I just type it in English and it comes out in Portuguese. And according to my assistant, it gets better all the time. And it's not me getting better, it's the artificial intelligence in this case. So there is something to be said about how this can be appropriated by artists to do something that is not subservient to technology. I think that what always has worried me, and ever since I started working with technology with artists, was always when technology becomes so important that the idea is gone, that the concept is erased, that it's all about wow. And it's really not interesting to me, I mean, because at the end of the day, engineers do much better things as creating wows. Artists are, it's like one day, I remember having a conversation with a colleague of mine in San Francisco who was saying to me, the museum needs to be an entertainment destination. And I said, if we try that game, we lost it because Disney will always beat us. So it's the same. I mean, artists are really good at doing what they're doing, but if they try to be engineers, they don't necessarily succeed. If they work with scientists, something may happen. That's amazing. I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to come down to camp since last Friday, but both Diana Policarpo and Francisca Rocha worked with scientists. And they would never have been able to carry out their work without the scientists that they work with. And yet, they made a work of art out of scientific information. So, to me, technology is the same. The use of technology, whether it's AI or anything else, or AR, or, But I would like to see, once again, artists being able to appropriate these tools and appropriate these technologies to make something that really would enable us to look at all this with a different perspective. Once again, it's all good and great to have artificial intelligence, but why are we fascinated? Why are we fascinated that we managed to create machines that are so capable of doing things better than us? It's very strange to me.
Totally agree, and I think maybe one of the things artistic discourse can do is exactly reveal the actual limitations of those systems.
That I buy. That I buy, absolutely.
With.
Yes.
So that we are not blindly putting our trust in them. But all of this to say that if it is in some way your perception that as we are using almost ubiquitously those technologies nowadays, doesn't it become an inevitable critical stance on the part of the artists, of some artists at least, that are concerned exactly with the social and cultural impact of these technologies?
There was a really interesting show in the Pompidou. I think it's closed now. That addressed this particular thing, like what kind of creative use can you make of artificial intelligence? There was one project that really struck me as being truly interesting. Is like an artist by the name of Eric Baudelaire actually organized 3 different artificial intelligence systems to create together a play. So the play was generated in real time. the dialogues were generated in real time. They were like bots talking to bots, basically. No, so it was an evolving project. I was pretty impressed, I have to say, because to me it was okay. There is a way that you can actually fuck with artificial intelligence and reveal, how uninteresting it is in the end, or as interesting as it is because we humans are feeding it. Because at the end of the day, all this machine learning is also, lots of people sitting in India somewhere pushing information into the system, no? Let's not pretend that it doesn't exist. I think that there is, this illusion that, machines are learning. They're learning, but they're not learning as fast as we would like them to. And so we try to believe that we are very good at making machines that are always more capable of learning from us. And then having this kind of strange fascination of wanting to have machines be better than us. This is also something that fascinates me. And I would love, to see more of this being discussed. So I wait for this. If you have any example to give me, please let me know.
I think you brought something very interesting to the table, which was saying that media are interesting insofar as we can extract some kind of new language out of them, or even, and perhaps there are other authors would say it in a different language, or even new media out of them. So invent media out of old media would be, invent new media out of old media would be in a way one of the tasks of artists. And I think what is perhaps strange in this, at least first moment of our relationship to artificial intelligence, is that what we are extracting from it, because of the way the system is actually built, is data. And so what we're doing is mash up data more than really extracting language or inventing some kind of new media. We are not still there. I'm not sure if
it
that
will happen.
But I think you put it very interestingly, and I suddenly, listening to you, realized that this data machine is what it is at the moment, and so it's difficult to extract
mechanical.
A language. But still going back to this idea that, well, what is there of interest in joining or trying to put together artificial and intelligence? But isn't art in a way a sort of artificial intelligence? Art is artistry, right? It is artistry, and it is precisely a way of bringing or making the world intelligible in a different way. That's what aesthetics was supposed to be.
I would say.
So
I would say,
what in a way is still worth saving about the encounters between art and technology.
But, it's really interesting. If you look like, they've not always aged very gracefully. But if you look at works by the Vasulkas, for instance, who were the first people to play with the Sony Portapack, which was really like the first portable video system, even though it was like super heavy. They were the first ones who I know, at least I'm aware of, and there were many others, but they're the ones who remained in history for some reason as the most salient proponents of that. But sort of like really saying, okay, so what is it that we can do once we appropriate the tools that were meant to be used for other purposes? Because obviously portable video technology was not meant for artists to be used. Although Sony was clever enough to give a few of these things away. I do believe that there is a model, and this is what EAT was all about, no? The idea of bringing artists to work with engineers to break open lanes and alleys that these engineers would never have been able to think about on their own, because they have this certain type of creativity, and if the artist comes and disrupt, then it opens different solutions or different practical matters and approaches to things. That means that all of a sudden the development of a technology is enriched by artists joining in. And to me, this is really interesting. I would love to see more of that. I think art can be understood as R&D. And it should be understood as R&D in many instances. So I think that, yes, of course, there should be. But how do you, I think that to go back to the art institution is an interface that I don't think can accommodate that, although it might in the future, We're going to start working on a project this summer, which is called Institutioning, and which is led by colleague, she's not a colleague actually, she's really coming in as a non-colleague, which is really quite interesting, called Luisa Santos. And she precisely would like to operate within the institution to disrupt the institution. And so she's going to bring in a laboratory approach to artistic institutional practice and see how far you can distort it. And see how far, by distorting it, you start creating the institution of tomorrow. And that institution of tomorrow might be a place where, you bring together scientists and artists if they haven't found another way to meet, and sort of create a chemical reaction, if you will, that can be seen in real time, happening in a space. I don't know if it's going to happen like this, because it's experimental, so I have no idea.
It is a wonderful topic.
But to me, it's really important to sort of think, okay, so how do you invent the institution of tomorrow, and what purpose will it have?
You talked about the interest in bringing together art and science, not just art and technology, but also art and science. And I was thinking that contemporary art seems to share more and more themes and concerns with science. It does not only intervene in contemporary debates on aesthetical, cultural, or even social themes, but also in big themes such as the Anthropocene, climate crisis, the engineering of life. These are subjects that are also interesting for artists today. They feel that they concern them too, and so I think it is interesting to think about this interface between art and science. Perhaps Natalia, who is really interested in the topic, can jump in.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
To me, it's really interesting that we're talking about this today, as if it never happened before. In the 19th century, these boundaries were so liquid. When you went on an expedition to explore the Amazon forest, you would send botanists, you would send pharmacists, you would send artists. And it's the conflation of information gathering by all these different brains that created the knowledge that was acquired by way of these expeditions. So to me, it's really interesting to think that we're like, artists and scientists should collaborate. It's like, you know what? They did collaborate before. And I remember showing a work by an Argentinian artist by the name of Irene Koppelman, who's now based in Amsterdam. She revisited the whole idea of the dictionary of colors. And the dictionary of colors in the 19th century was a reference point that was used both by artists and scientists, and it was the same language. What happened when all these things went separated? Why? Why is it that this didn't keep together?
Perhaps has to do with the institution thing that you were
perhaps
talking about.
So, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, it's okay. So talking about art and science, we know from the works of research like Stephen Wilson that encounters between art and science aren't something entirely new. However, what we see now is some types of proposals in the increasing presence of artworks created by artists in collaboration with scientists, often with the support of dedicated laboratories. My main question is, what can art do for science? What can science do for art?
So, to go back to what I was just saying about scientists and artists being closer to each other in the past, there is something, and this is very, very tentative what I'm going to say. There's an empirical way of approaching the world. If you are a scientist, you're observing the world and you're trying to sort of make sense of it. and you're trying to understand how it works, and you're trying to make experiments to sort of see if what you're thinking is making sense. If it works, you're really happy, you go to the next step, and so on. I mean, there's a model of exploring that's fairly rigorous and has a degree of, it requires perhaps, and I'm not a scientist, so it's hard for me to sort of state this without saying, you know, I may be completely wrong. But to me, where the artists and the scientists diverge is that the artist is by nature, and once again, I may sound really romantic, so I'm tempted to not follow a clean path and not apply the same kind of intellectual rigor. I mean, at least not the same kind of intellectual rigor than a scientist. So I think that if you bring those two together, there's obviously something that's enriching each other that happens, no? I mean, on the one hand, a scientist is going to say, no, you cannot do this because how are you going to prove what you... I don't need to prove anything. You need to prove something because you're a scientist. I'm an artist. I don't need to prove anything. I need to experiment, and I need to keep experimenting. And I don't really care of the outcome. You see what I mean? So I think it's a little bit like this. You know, it's like... There is a wonderful Moroccan artist by the name of Hicham Berada who does chemical reactions as performances. So he sort of like, you know, has all the instruments of chemical reactions, and then he sort of like puts an endoscopic camera or something that enables to film this, and then he makes his preparations, and then things happen. Things happen that he has no idea. But the camera observed the beauty of these chemical reactions happening in real time. And that's his work. So to me, it's really, it's poetic. And at the same time, it's sort of like also tells something about the nature of human thinking and human way of relating to the world. You know, this idea of curiosity animates both the scientist and the artist. The way they handle curiosity might be different and complementary. So one opens new worlds to the other. And this is, I think, what happens with technology as well. I think that the moment you have, you know, different types of mind encountering, the outcome could be really boring, of course, but could also be extraordinary because of this different way of thinking about things. So to me, this is what I was trying to remember the name of this this man who he was from Monte Carlo. He was called Hercule. I can't remember his last name. We need to sort of find out. He's the person who invented in the mid-19th century, in the middle of the Amazonian forest, a way to create a pattern that is impossible to copy. And his findings from the 19th century is still something that is being used in the manufacturing of banknotes. Because this is the most efficient way of making sure that you cannot make a copy of a banknote. So it's so interesting that somebody who was basically in the middle of the Amazonian forest trying to observe the way things were organized and coming up with something that we still use today, which has nothing to do with what he was trying to make happen.
Before NFTs.
Yeah, but it's for me it's so interesting that, you know, these kinds of things happen all the time. It's also having developed a way to create photography before with nothing but a paper that was covered with some material, but that he could carry with him, and then the revealing was made with urine. Because you know what, when you're in the middle of the forest, there's nothing you can do but carry the least amount of things, because you don't have, 10 hands, and you cannot carry very heavy things forever. So crazy solutions coming out of necessity from a mind that's a scientific mind, but also like emulated by people around them. So I think that this is what happens, encounter between different types of thinking. I think that's what makes it so interesting, I would say.
Yeah, sure. Do you think that we can map or see somehow how artistic research can contribute to scientific research? Can we see art as a reasonable and a related path to building knowledge?
As I said, I think that what artists can bring to any form of research or thinking process is a certain degree of freedom. As some people like to call it, thinking out of the box, yeah? But it's because of this idea, I mean, there is no... Art, in a way, has no goal. Science has a goal. Science needs to move forward with a certain number of criteria to sort of, make something happen. Does it mean that it doesn't have this flexibility and capacity to make things, step out of the beaten track? Of course not. Otherwise, most of the scientific discoveries that were made have profoundly changed our world would not exist. But at the same time, I think that it's still... I still think that, having no real purpose as a modus operandi, it's something that's much harder for a scientist to achieve than for an artist, because an artist is meant to do that, in a way. I mean, again, I don't want to sound caricatural, because it's always dangerous, these kind of conversations. But I think that clearly there is a system of rigor, of intellectual rigor, in the scientific structure. You have to demonstrate things. Once you've demonstrated things, you have to move to the next thing. You organize. I was talking to my brother, who's a mathematician, and he was saying to me, I think of my activity as conceptual art. And I said to him, yeah, you have a point. So what's the outcome? What's the output? The output is a paper. My output is a paper. I said, okay, so you demonstrate whatever, and then what? And then I communicate it to the world by way of going to a conference and talking to people. And an artist, does a product, whichever product it is, and shows it in a gallery where people go and see it. And I said, okay, that sort of makes sense. I mean, it's not impossible to consider it like this. So is it the delivery system that's different? Maybe just not, because I think that, again, the way science is structured is far more regulated than art. I mean, art, you can make art with anything you want. You can make durational art, you can make, a painting, you can make a performance, there's no form. And there's less and less form, particularly when art starts engaging with other disciplines, because it appropriates from other disciplines, no? I think, once again, to refer back to the Irene Koppelman piece that you might have seen, actually, because it was shown at Kunsthalle Lissabon a few years back. It was all kinds of ways of measuring color and visibility underwater. It was really fascinating. So it was like she really functioned like, using display strategies that were artistic and at the same time completely informed by a scientific thinking. And these kind of things happen all the time. I'm thinking of another artist who I worked with, who's Brazilian, called Leticia Ramos, who did experiments building machines to replicate the movement of earthquakes in order to be able to take pictures. So to try and photograph an earthquake. She created all these machines in her studio in Sao Paulo to be able to take pictures that looked like an earthquake picture. So you see what I'm saying? I mean, there's this. I don't know. There's a very thin line in the end between those two practices. But I think each of them, informs each other, sort of like enhances each other's. I think that's the best thing that can happen when artists and scientists collaborate.
Yes.
I think that there is something very interesting that you said about, of course, artists and scientists sharing a lot of things, but still having different practices. But there must be something really profound for the fact that what they share in a way is the will and the drive to experiment. I can't think, as I usually say, of two other fields that have such a concept at the center as their gravity center as art and science when it comes to experiment. I think they're really close in that matter. So there must be something probably.
But it's also, I mean, it's interesting that you say this because I'm thinking about an experiment that was carried out. I briefly ran the New Media Centre at the ICA in London, really briefly, like a year. And the New Media Centre was started as a partnership between Sun Microsystems and the ICA. And when I spoke to the people at Sun Microsystems, I said to them, what do you expect from this? And they were like, well, it's a good place for us to do seminars. So, we pay and then we can give you computers. And I said, what do you think artists can do with Sun Microsystem computers? Nothing, because they don't know anything about programming. Oh, you have a point. I said, so if you want us to do something, we need programmers. Yeah, but you cannot give you programmers because, that's a lot of time spent working with artists. And I said, think a bit of another way. This is R&D. Yes, exactly. That means you're going to train programmers to solve problems that they would never have been able to think about. Because the artists are always going to question the limits of technology. Why can I not do this? I've heard this question so many times when we were doing AdaWeb. I want to do this. Impossible. Why not? Well, because the coding, blah, 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 blah. Find a solution. Why are you here? You're a technologist. Find a solution. I want to do this. But why do you want to do this? I don't need to justify myself. I just want to do it. So I think it's the same. It's like, I think that the moment, you question the limits of a thinking process, you open new opportunities. And that's what scientists do as well. I mean, they look at something and like, really, is it the way it works? But I observed that this wasn't like this. So it cannot be that what I've been told is really this, because maybe actually I observed something that demonstrates the opposite. And artists do the same thing, but in a very different kind of way, because they don't even have to do this reasoning. They just go directly for like, what's happening here? Yeah?
But of course, perhaps one of the most troubling things about science today is that it is maybe losing that aim that supposedly guides it towards an end. Perhaps the most troubling thing is that, in the sense you were saying, it's becoming poetic as poiesis, right? Making things just because we can, just because it is possible, just because that kind of creative potentiality is there in science. And I think that's also why artists and scientists are coming together, and perhaps from the point of view of artists to question that. Should science do everything that is in its reach to do just because it is possible, just because that poiesis can also come about in science?
But it's funny. As you were talking, I was thinking of the Diana Policarpo project. So, ciguatera is an illness, as you may already know.
Yeah, I know that project.
And that illness comes from an observation of fish eating a certain algae that's primarily encountered next to Islas Selvagens, which is clearly become toxic because of human activity. Okay, so we have an artist who's observing, the wildlife in this environment, obviously with scientific support, because, the rigor of our scientific thinking is useful. And she demonstrates, or she reveals, or she's interested in the fact that, the fish eat the algae. The fish is fine. If I kill the fish to eat it, I get sick. So I have, as a human being, contributed to the fact that this algae has become toxic to me only once I eat the fish that has eaten it, which is fascinating. Would a scientist have any reason to find this out? Maybe not. Would a scientist, go as far as to sort of say, hey, isn't that an interesting metaphor? We're actually creating the conditions of our disappearing. Yeah, by way of polluting the planet so that the algae that grows contains a toxin that once the fish has ingested this toxin and not been affected by it, creates a situation by which we get sick when we eat the fish. It's fascinating.
Yes.
And once again, I really don't know that a scientist would necessarily be able to sort of say, wow, this is really interesting, conceptually, philosophically. You could say, okay, so we should make sure that the fish that eats the algae doesn't get fished by fishermen, which basically means, stay away from the Islas Salvagens because the fish that are there are contaminated, or find a way to decontaminate the fish or whatever. That would be a scientific approach to things, I would say. But the artist is there to say, hey, this is, we're fucking up the planet. This is the planet responding to us. You want to destroy me? Well, I might destroy you first. And this is a really interesting thing. Once again, I don't know. Maybe the scientists would have found this, but probably not expressed it the way Diana Policarpo does it. So to me, this is where the points of encounter becomes interesting, because without the tools of the science, she would never have been able to find this out.